So earlier today, right before we basically started recording this podcast, the Hollywood Reporter has released a brand new exclusive that apparently, allegedly, the Russo brothers are in early talks to potentially direct the next two Avengers movies, Avengers 5 and Avengers 6, two movies that we've talked about for a couple of years now, ever since we learned about them back at the 2022 San Diego Comic-Con. There have been all sorts of changes, all sorts of conversations about who's going to direct these movies. Initially, they had a director for Avengers 5, Destin Daniel Cretton, but he stepped away to focus on Shang-Chi 2 and some other projects. We also talked about this a couple of weeks ago, that apparently Sean Levy, the director of Deadpool and Wolverine, had allegedly been chosen by Marvel to be the director. And there was also another report that came out a few weeks ago that allegedly the Russo brothers went back to Marvel, pitched that they would direct Secret Wars, but Marvel didn't want to work with them again. They wanted to actually find some new directors. There's some rumors and speculations as to why that's the case, but now here we are with a pretty solid confirmation that they will be stepping up and returning back to Marvel. This is what the report says. The Russo brothers are in early talks to return to Marvel Studios to direct not just one, but the next two Avengers movie. Sources tell The Hollywood Reporter. The hiring ends a months-long high-stakes search by the studio for filmmakers to oversee the fifth and sixth Avengers movies. Multiple names were in contention, including Deadpool and Wolverine director Sean Levy, who was offered the gig. Sources say the talks are in the early stages. The move also marks a homecoming for the Russos, who jumped from the world of TV comedy. In total, they directed four of Marvel's biggest and best regarded movies, going on to helm Captain America, The Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, and of course, Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Combined, their Marvel movies grossed $6.681 billion, with Endgame standing as the number two movie of all time globally with $2.79 billion at the box office. And so this is pretty massive. This is big news. What do you think about this? Do you hate this decision? Do you love this decision? Does it make the most sense in the world for the Russos to come back home to where they pretty much made their name? How are you feeling about the Russos potentially stepping up to direct Avengers 5 and Avengers 6?
From a business standpoint, how could it not make sense, right? I mean, these are the directors who literally directed and kind of own your biggest films that you have created up until this point. So I think, us talking about maybe them returning to form, maybe them kind of going back to what's comfortable. I think from a business standpoint, it absolutely and for sure makes sense. I mean, it's like, yeah, just go get the Russos, bring them back. They're going to make more Avengers films. They can treat those characters correctly, do those characters correctly, and potentially get another good film out of it. And I think that also earns, I think, the trust of some of your fans who are like, well, yeah, they did those movies. Oh yeah, I'll definitely be there for those Avengers films. And if they want them to be big, it's not a bad idea. Now, me personally, I still really like the idea of trying these new things here. I know we've been in a rut. I know it's been a lot going on. I know it's been weird, but I still really would like to see, I think, something different from the MCU. And that being said, I would like to see different directors. When I heard Sean Levy was on the table, it made me excited because I was like, yeah, he could do something like that. Destin Daniel Cretton, you know what I mean? I was like, yeah, let's do that. Let's try somebody else with these films. And I think I was interested, to see where those would go, to see a different take, to see somebody else helm these characters in this franchise. So business standpoint, for me, it makes sense. From a personal standpoint, I just want to see something else. I love the Russos. I still think it's going to be great. I still would like to see them do it. I wouldn't be mad like, oh, the Russos are back again, but I would rather see somebody else, I think, step into the director's chair for some other Avengers movies, man. Because yeah, we've been there, kind of done that. So I just kind of want to see something new.
So would I have personally picked the Russos to come back and direct these two movies? Probably not. Am I mad or upset that they're directing these two movies? Not at all. And I think that one of the most important questions that I have moving forward is who's writing the movie, because it's not just about the Russos. Mm-hmm. It's about whether or not they're going to get Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely back to write these two movies, because those two writers wrote all of the movies that the Russos directed for the MCU. This was really a four-person pair when we talk about those movies and how successful they were. And I think that that's equally, if not more important than even the Russos themselves directing, because there's also been conversations about who's writing the script and who's overseeing that. Michael Waldron, whether or not he's actually still attached, which I would probably bet that's not the case anymore. I would I would likely think that because the Russos are coming back, they're going to get Stephen McFeely and Christopher Marcus back. I think that that's a pretty safe bet at this point. And if that's the case, you can't bet against this tandem. You can't bet
Yeah.
against this team at all. And I think it's very important for people to remember from a business perspective what this does indeed mean for the future of the MCU and for Marvel. Hypothetically speaking, let's just say the next two Avengers movies can match the box office success of Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. We're
Right.
talking about $5 billion on the table. That is a lot of fucking money. And it doesn't even include all the things outside of box office receipts. We're not talking about licensing, brand partnerships, VOD rentals, TV licenses, merchandise. We're not even including all the ancillary stuff that's going to make a lot more money. We're just talking strictly ticket sales. Potentially $5 billion on the table. That is not something you gamble with. These have the potential to be the biggest movies of all time, just like Infinity War and Endgame were. And when you put it in that perspective, there is no risk that you can take with this. This is not the time to start playing around and get cute with your director choices. And I think it's also important to remember, too, that there was never going to be an unknown name or quantity that hadn't worked with Marvel that was going to direct these movies. The only names that we have been circulating were people that had already worked with Marvel. Folks like Sean Levy, folks like Ryan Coogler, Sam Raimi, all of the people who have made movies with them before. This is not the time to bring in somebody new who's never done a Marvel movie. I'm sorry, this sandbox is not open for everybody. This is for the big kids. Like, only the experienced people who know how to work with them belong in the sandbox because there's just too much money on the table. These are literally some of the biggest movies that'll ever be made. You add that on top of the fact that Marvel has been in a creative rut over the past few years, and the perception is that they've lost it ever since Endgame happened, and they need to somehow find the magic and get people excited again. I mean, this is kind of a no-brainer choice, even though they probably didn't want to go this route because it seemed like that they were talking to other people like Sean Levy. And I would bet that that's likely due to the case that the Russos only have more power now. They have become mega producers in Hollywood. They have their own company. They probably want to bring in their own team. They want to get paid more clearly because of the success that they brought the studio. They're going to get paid multiple times over for being directors, producers, all sorts of stuff. And so they're going to wield more power. But one thing that I've always just tried to really harp on is the fact that, again, for these movies in particular with Marvel, any franchise pick for that matter, but especially these two movies that are going to come down the pipeline, you have to have people that know what they're doing. That's the bottom line about it. You have to have people that can commit and dedicate their lives to one of the most rigorous productions ever mounted in Hollywood. This is not an easy job. And these two obviously were equipped to do it because they've done it before. You have to give over your life for an entire year just to film the movies because they're likely going to film them back to back. That's a full year, not including post-production, pre-production. We're talking about another 3-year commitment, 3 to 4 year commitment. It's exhausting, and the fact that there are two of them, and then there's two potential writers also that are going to work with them, plus Kevin Feige, plus their entire creative team. I mean, you have to make sure that this is something that people have ultimately the wherewithal and the stamina to complete because it's not going to be an easy task at all. I guess it's like a follow-up, just considering like where things are, and it also feels like that this was probably going to get announced at Comic-Con, but it came out I think earlier than they would have liked it to. I feel like they would have confirmed this at Comic-Con. But I mean, ultimately, like in thinking about Avengers 5 and Avengers 6, we still don't technically know what Avengers 5 is. What is even that movie? We're speculating here. We'll probably find out next Saturday at Hall H, but because they're directing it together, I think that says something. Because initially the conversations for Sean Levy, for Destin Daniel Cretton, it was only Avengers 5. It was never going to be those directors directing both movies. But now that they have the Russos directing both of these movies together, I mean, what does that say to you about the potential story? Does it just become Secret Wars Part 1 and Part 2? We've had a lot of the Doom talk and Doom speculation. I mean, does this say anything to you just in terms of how connected those movies might actually be because they are going to direct both of them?
Man, such a good question. I do think it is a part 1 and part 2 of something. And I do think it may be Secret Wars related for sure, or something at least that has, I think, the same scope as Secret Wars does have. And I think because of I feel like they still have to do Secret Wars because of all the Earths we have and all these other things. But I think switching the focus off Kang is going to take 2 movies, if that makes sense. Like we got to do whatever we do, we're going to do. You know what I'm saying? From now, whatever Deadpool and Wolverine is doing, you that whatever that first Avengers film is, it's like, all right, y'all, this is our villain, these are our stakes, this is what's happening. This is all the setup. That way, it's like, all right, going into that second Avengers film, we've done all the work that we need to do for this movie to make sense, and then that be the big Secret Wars movie to tie everything up. So I definitely think it's a part 1, part 2. Definitely think it's Infinity War in-game feeling or coded, but just on a different, of course, different story. But I definitely think it's leaning in that direction. I like the idea of Secret Wars part 1, part 2, because again, they did indeed hit Young Avengers stuff. Maybe part 1 is Young Avengers stuff. Maybe part 2 is bringing it all together. You know what I mean? Like maybe it's something like that. So I definitely think it's somewhere up that alley.
Yeah, I think from a story perspective, this will be a Secret Wars overarching story that they're going to do in both of these movies. They probably won't call the first one Secret Wars. They'll just find like a different name for it, but the story in and of itself will be Secret Wars. I do think that that's just the case now, and that these movies have probably become even more intrinsically connected than maybe initially planned. You know, I feel like the Kang Dynasty, Secret Wars, that was going to be connected, but there was probably, I don't know, there was probably going to be just a lot more to it, just considering Kang was kind of being positioned as like the big bad, and now we have the possibility of an entirely new villain who may be on the table. I think perhaps by next weekend with Hall H, all will be clear in terms of what that direction looks like. But do want to take some time, eventually, probably in next week's episode, to do some more speculation about what the movies might be, what they look like, who the characters and the antagonists might be. But I think one last thing I'll say about this, the Russo brothers will not be the only ones returning to the Secret Wars proposition, whatever it may be. This is just the beginning, y'all. Just let everybody know right now. Spoiler alert. Very soon here, because they're going to go into production on these movies next year, we're going to start to hear about people like Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans, Scarlett Johansson, Tobey Maguire, Hugh Jackman. These names are going to be in this movie. I just want people to know that right now, which is also another reason why they're going to direct this, because you have to literally bring together some of the biggest names in Hollywood to do this all again. We talked about that 60 characters rumor that was floating around. I mean, that's a lot of characters, so I think we just have to start to gear ourselves up to realize like exactly what this movie is going to be. And we're kind of returning to, I think, a similar time where we were in the lead up to Infinity War and Endgame, where we're kind of in that position now. But again, I think by next weekend, hopefully, fingers crossed, a little bit more will be clear, but we'll see how things shape out and continue to shape up with Avengers 5 and Avengers 6. But